For those of you who are new to the channel, I write articles for a bunch of websites, and I have already written an article covering the 50 best players in the NBA heading into the current season. So if you want to see that, I probably explained all my choices better in that article than I can in this video, because I'm cutting everything down to make it reasonable to edit, so I don't have to spend 2 hours editing this video before the first regular season game. But I'll link the article in the description. It might also pop up in the top corner right now. We'll see. Let's get into the top 12. Tier 1, I've broken this down into multiple tiers of NBA caliber players. In Tier 1, these are the MVP candidates, the perennial guys who will be up in that discussion. Before we begin, I like to mention that I am accounting for some regression and also development for players. So you'll see young guys maybe appear a little bit higher than you would expect. You'll see older players maybe a little bit lower. I am taking into account injuries, so if you are going to miss, say, the first month of the season, that will impact you a little bit. And if you're going to miss the entire season, like Klay Thompson, I still included him on this list because, I mean, let's be honest, he is a great player. And I hate season-ending injuries. I really do. And I just feel like ignoring him entirely, ignoring what he's done would be rude. I wanted to include him on this article, so he is going to appear at some point, even though he will not be playing this season. I know that might be a controversial decision, but I feel like it's the right decision to make in this situation. So let's kick off the list right away with number 1. It's LeBron James. And this shouldn't come as any shock to anybody. After what he did this past season, winning another championship, and also playing a larger role defensively when he has in his first year in LA. Of course, he did have that groin injury that sidelined him for a little while. But defensively, he was back this year playing much better than when he had been in the past, arguably 2 years maybe, but certainly last year with Los Angeles. And, of course, leading the NBA in assists, playing a little bit of point guard there for them. He is the best player in the world. I know he's not going to have the amazing stat lines. He might not win an MVP again. And you might account for a little bit of regression here because he's probably not going to play every game this season because of the shortened turnaround from last year to this year. And he's getting up there in age. I still think you have to give him the number 1 spot. LeBron is the best player in the world right now. I don't care if Giannis won Defensive Player of the Year or MVP. LeBron's number 1. Which brings us to number 2, and number 2 is Giannis. And honestly, it was not a lock that he would be in this spot, which might have surprised a lot of people. It surprised me as well, but when I was sitting down really putting this list together, I wasn't sure that Giannis should be number 2. I was positive LeBron was going to be number 1. He's always going to be number 1. I did not know where Giannis was going to end up here. He is number 2 for now. Obviously gives you that rim protection. Unstoppable almost when he gets going downhill, but you can build a wall against him at times. There are teams that have developed defensive schemes to stop Giannis. We've seen it happen a couple of times now. And frankly, unless he develops outside shooting, I don't think he'll ever be a consistent number 1 overall player in the NBA. Number 3 is Kawhi Leonard, obviously a great two-way player, really upped his ability to score in the past couple of years. He's playing more of a facilitating role offensively, even though he's kind of ramping back his involvement in defense a little bit, but that's fine. I mean, all players do that at some point in their careers, especially when you're a superstar and you have to be significantly involved on the offensive side of the ball. I got Kawhi number 3, even though they did have that, ugly loss in the playoffs. I'm still keeping up here. We know he's a proven champion. We saw him win with the Raptors, so I'll keep him at number 3 for now. Even though he is limited in some extent, he drives into nowhere at points in times. His passing is still developing. His vision is questionable at times, but there's still a lot he does well. I think number 3 is not a reach for Kawhi Leonard. Number 4, Anthony Davis. I had no idea where Anthony Davis was going to end up on this list. I really didn't, because there's a lot good and bad with the situation. Anthony Davis is a very versatile player who can put the ball all on the ground. He can basically beat you from the three-point line to the basket if he has to. He played point guard a little bit growing up. Everyone knows this at this point. He can shoot threes, but not at a phenomenal rate. Not like a Karl-Anthony Towns, but he can still shoot threes well enough to you have to guard him back there. He passes well. Already mentioned he dribbles. Defensively, he's phenomenal. He's going to be in the top 3 defenders in the league every single year. He's going to be that defensive player of the year debate annually. And, of course, now he wins the championship with LeBron in LA. My main concern about Anthony Davis is, will he ever be the dominant force who just wrecks everything by himself? So I've seen Kawhi Leonard kind of do that at times with Toronto, where he is the one-man army. I've seen that happen, even though they had Siakam and Lowry on the team. I've seen Kawhi do it. I've seen LeBron do it. And I've seen Giannis do it as well. I don't know if we'll ever see it from Anthony Davis in that sense, but from what we've seen so far, Anthony Davis is a Hall of Fame caliber player. He's going to be in the MVP debate every year. I just don't know if he's going to be able to surpass guys like Kawhi, LeBron, or Giannis. I'm going to mention number 5 and 6 together at the same time. Number 5 is Kevin Durant. Number 6 is Steph Curry. Obviously, they both missed a lot of time. Durant not playing at all last year. Curry played like 5 or 6 games last season, so not a lot at all, and he didn't really look good in those appearances. Kevin Durant has already shown during the preseason that he's gotten a lot of what he was back. I don't know if he'll be 100%. I don't think he ever will be 100% again. Maybe some explosiveness is gone. But Durant at this point could be 90% of himself. And even if he is 90% of himself, that's still good enough to be a top 10 player in the world, in my opinion. And also his game is very much in the sense that he's very good at just scoring. He scores, he's a bucket. He scores from anywhere on the court. And honestly, he doesn't need the explosiveness necessarily of a LeBron James where, he drives the cup all the time. Durant doesn't have to be that guy to put up numbers and be effective. So I think he will still be a top 7 or 8 player in the world, despite suffering that Achilles injury over a year and a half ago at this point, I believe. And yet Curry, who, like I said, missed a lot of time last year as well, but was basically a wash for the Warriors anyways. There's been a lot of criticism of him this year. I think people are starting to fear that the injuries will catch up to him at some point, even though he's a three-point shooter. So really, he's still going to be an effective player into his mid to late 30s. I don't know. I mean, I still feel very confident in Curry. I still feel very comfortable having him up here this high. But there are a lot of people who are starting to question his role in this NBA hierarchy. I'm not one of those people, but it certainly seems that the discussion has been opened. Number 7, James Harden. I acknowledge James Harden is potentially the best scorer in the NBA when Kevin Durant is not fully healthy. I acknowledge that he can score from almost anywhere on the court. I get that he's a pretty good passer at times. He's not riding the clock all the way down to the end and throwing to one of his teammates. And obviously a very high volume three-point shooter. And there's no really way to shut him down entirely. But there are concerns about maybe the personality or dedication at times. And like I said, he hasn't won a championship. A lot of these other guys already brought up outside of Giannis have won championships. So there is concern there for Harden. Defensively, he's actually underrated in the post. But perimeter-wise, transition-wise, not really. You're not going to get a plus defensive performance from him in those areas. At the same time, the scoring makes up for a lot of that. It just, to me, is not enough to put him over guys who are two-way players, or over someone like Steph Curry, who's a 2-time MVP and has won championships and has been the focal point on championship teams. I do not see Harden eclipsing a player like that, despite his phenomenal performances over the past 2 or 3 years. Number 8 is Luka Doncic. Luka was already a top 10 player in the NBA last year by the time the season finished. My main concern here is that he might plateau a little bit, because as it is, he's already a very good player, already an MVP candidate, but if he plateaus, then he's not really going to make that jump over guys like Harden to the top 7. So I have him at 8 for now. And I know some people might say, well, that's too high. He hasn't played enough. Well, you don't really have to play a lot to be a great player in the NBA. I don't understand. I mean, he played in the EuroLeague and was an MVP over there. So why does he have to play 3 or 4 years before he gets into the MVP discussion here in the U.S.? I don't think it has to happen. I think he can play 2 years and be in that discussion. Now, some people might say this is too low because they expect him to grow in his third season. That doesn't always happen. So let's view the good and bad here. He is already an MVP candidate. But at the same time, we need to make sure he's going to grow in the third year and not just sit and plateau where he is right now, which is why I think 8 is a safe spot for Luka Doncic. All right, Damian Lillard, number 9. Nikola Jokic at number 10. Lillard is very close to Steph Curry, except not necessarily as efficient from 3. But to me, the same kind of electric scoring guards, not much offered defensively. Lillard is getting closer and closer to being a guy who's going to break into the top 7. It's just a question of when. I have trouble moving him ahead of Curry right now, but if, say, Lillard scores 3+ points this season, the Warriors get eliminated early in the playoffs, then it might be a little bit of a different situation. Right now, I'm still living a little bit on what Curry and Durant have done in the past, but if we were to remove those two from this discussion because of injuries, you would have Lillard be in the top 7. So Lillard is a guy who, to me, could go higher on this list, but he's a little bit stuck in no man's land because of his situation, because of the achievements of some of these other players on this list. And then Jokic. Jokic is obviously the best passing big man in the NBA right now, and arguably a top 5 passer overall. My main concerns are for him. Defense has never been a strong point. It's never going to be a strong point. He doesn't have that natural athleticism to be a shot blocker inside necessarily, and he's just not very naturally gifted at playing defense, either on the interior or outside by the three-point arc. That's not something he's going to be great at. And scoring-wise, he's going to get you probably 20 points per game, but he's not going to be the guy who drops 30 a night. He's not going to average 25 a night. So there are some scoring limitations there that comes, with being a gifted passer as well. That kind of makes up for that. But at the same time, a little lackluster defensively, not going to be a high-volume scorer. So that kind of limits his peak here. I don't view him as a top 7 player in the world. I don't think he'll get there unless he starts scoring at a higher rate or starts making more three-point shots. For now, top 10 is reasonable for him. I don't think getting to the top 7 is necessarily going to happen. That's not a given based on his current situation. And then number 11 and number 12, I didn't have these guys in my first draft in my top 50. I put them in tier 2 to begin with, but I've moved them up to tier 1, the MVP discussion. Number 11, Jimmy Butler. Number 12, Jayson Tatum. Jimmy Butler's an all-defensive caliber player. We saw what he did in the finals. He's capable of carrying that load for a team. He's capable of being the focal point. He doesn't have to score 25 points per game to be impactful. So him and Jokic are a little bit in the same boat where they're not going to have the outstanding numbers necessarily, but will still be the focal point of teams that are going to have championship aspirations. And Jayson Tatum is going to have the numbers. Jayson Tatum is going to be a guy who's going to score 20 plus a night. He's going to score like 25 plus per night by the time this is all said and done. He's going to probably get closer to 30 at some point in his career. I think he's that good. I think the jump he made last year was the jump we expected him to make in year 2, and that didn't necessarily happen. So a lot of people jumped off the bandwagon. Now Tatum is back in that discussion. I'm expecting a lot of growth from him here. I know Doncic already had that tremendous growth in year 2 for him. That moves him ahead of Jayson Tatum. I think Tatum will catch up a little bit this year based on what he's capable of doing. And defensively, the key for me here is Tatum tries defensively. Tatum is going to develop into a guy who's going to be a borderline all defensive caliber player. He might be what LeBron and Dwayne Wade were when they were all defensive caliber players for maybe 3 or 4 years. They were not going to be Kobe Bryant, who's going to get like 10 or 11 of them. That's not what they were going to be. But they were going to get 3 or 4 of them in their careers. I think Tatum can be that kind of guy where he'll have a few years where he's a tremendous two-way player who's making an impact both defensively and offensively. We're scoring 25 plus per game. He can be a guy who scores 25 plus per night. Well, not necessarily being a defensive player of the year candidate, but being in that all defensive discussion. I don't know if that's going to happen this season, but I project it will happen in the next 2 or 3 years. And for Tatum, I'm still expecting a lot of growth this year. That's why I have him at number 12. That's why I have him as a fringe MVP candidate heading into the 2020-2021 NBA season. All right, so now we're rolling into tier 2. These are all NBA superstars. And a quick reminder, you can find the link to this article where I have it all listed out and my reasonings explained probably better than I can in this video in the description. Just follow that link. You'll see my article there. And it gives you the tiers and the player rankings. But number 13, this is just outside the MVP range, and it's Joel Embiid. And I've had Embiid in the top 10 in the past. I've had him in the MVP range in the past. The reason why I took him out is, one, the cycle of injuries, rehab, and injuries is really starting to weigh him down, and he's not playing very many games every year. He's obviously missing, I think, 20 games, maybe even more than that per season at this point. So you have to worry about the injuries. I think he had some regression in scoring this past year. The three-point shot, which a lot of people were very enthusiastic about when he entered the NBA, has not developed or not remained consistent throughout his time in the league. And a little bit of the way Brett Brown used him, where he put him on the perimeter a lot, made him take a lot of three-point shots. Didn't really play to his strength. It'll be interesting to see now with Doc Rivers, the head coach, that changes and if Embiid has a better chance of succeeding, which I think he will. I think he'll break back into that MVP range. But for now, we need to tone down our expectations a little bit. He's still an all-world center, but he's not right now one of the top 12 players in the world. He's number 13. Number 14 might be a bit controversial, but it's Embiid's teammate, Ben Simmons. And Ben Simmons is very limited offensively. And I'm not disagreeing with that. That in itself is pretty obvious. He doesn't shoot the 3-ball at all. Maybe takes 3 or 4 3-point shots every year. Maybe he'll actually start taking more under Doc Rivers. I don't know, but we'll see. We'll find out as the season progresses. However, he's a very good passer. He's got the great physical size that everyone wants in a two-way player at this point. I mean, think about guys like LeBron. We always talk about that. Luka's got the size, but not the athleticism that Ben Simmons has. Ben Simmons is a tremendous player. Great passing ability. I already mentioned that. Inside scoring is phenomenal. When he gets going, he's similar to Giannis in that when he gets going, it's very hard to stop him when he goes downhill. Although he is more manageable than Giannis in this sense because Giannis has longer legs and longer arms. Ben Simmons' defensive capabilities, though, are what boost him up to number 14. I mean, this guy was a defensive player of the year candidate this past season, despite not being a block machine or altering shots maybe the same way guys like Rudy Gobert and Giannis Antetokounmpo. And still, Simmons was an incredible player up there, I would think, in the top 3, in my opinion. I know some people probably had him lower. But I thought Simmons was a legitimate defensive player of the year candidate. And if he maintains that defensive style and that rhythm, he'll still be a top 20 player, if not a top 15 player moving forward. It's just that you'll never have the full realization of his offensive game if he doesn't start taking more mid-range and three-point shots. Number 15 is Chris Paul. And I realize this might be a little too high for some people, considering he wasn't an All-NBA first-teamer last year, considering he's 35 years old. He's not scoring as much. He's not getting as many assists. But if you look at what he did last year with the Thunder, I mean, he took a team that could have been a lottery team and turned them into a playoff contender that pushed the Rockets to 7 games. He was fantastic. He was arguably the best player in clutch time last year. And he showed he was a floor general. He showed he still was the point guard last year. And he played that well. I think people will look at the numbers and say, well, it wasn't nearly as good as maybe some people were making him out to be. No, he was fantastic. You have to understand that. He was tremendous. And now he's playing with the Suns. Maybe the numbers will take another step back again. Again, he's 35 years old. Getting up there in age. The numbers are not there like they were maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But his impact still is. And now he's teaming with Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. There's a good chance here that he's still an All-Star next year, or maybe he's not an All-Star, but the impact he's going to make should be tremendous in Phoenix. And after what we saw with OKC, I can't wait to see what he does with Devin Booker and that young group up there with the Suns. Number 16, speaking of a young player who could probably use someone like Chris Paul, it's Karl-Anthony Towns. And Cat is one of the most talented players in the NBA. If we're going just based purely on talent, he's top 10. He's that good. His three-point shooting is phenomenal. He's one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA, not just one of the best three-point shooting bigs, one of the best three-point shooters, period. He's that good. And very few big men in the league right now, if ever, are capable of matching what he's done right now in terms of the three-point shooting. So he's got the full offensive arsenal. I would still like to see him improve a little bit as a passer and as a dribbler. But overall, the offensive game, it's fantastic. My biggest concern with him is the defense. I mean, he's lackluster on that end. He's got heavy feet. His arms, I don't want to say he flails his arms because he's obviously much more athletic than that, but he doesn't have full body control sometimes. He doesn't contest shots in the same way that guys like Anthony Davis or Joel Embiid do. So someone like Cat, tremendous offensive talent, top 10 player in terms of just pure talent, but doesn't have it on the decent defensive side of the ball, and his focus just in terms of winning, it's questionable. I mean, look at some of the comments that Jimmy Butler had about him and about Andrew Wiggins after he left. And really, I think that's where the national narrative is going right now because they haven't won with Cat on the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it just is never developed despite having the star talent there and the high draft picks. So I think there is some truth to the fact that Cat is not doing everything that he has to do for his team to win, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But like I said, his talent is so great that even with the way he is now, this guy will still be a perennial top 20 player in the league. Just might not get those All-NBA first team or All-NBA second team nods. All right, number 17. If I could go back and amend this statement, which I technically could. I could go back in and edit the article and change the ranking, but I'm not going to do that. If I could, I would change it. So I have Russell Westbrook at number 17. So I have Russell Westbrook in tier 2 ahead of a bunch of guys who, in hindsight, might not be the best decision. Westbrook got traded to the Washington Wizards this year. He's going to play with Bradley Beal. We'll see how that works out, if it works out. And at this point, because of what's happening with James Harden, I think people are going to be more friendly towards Russell Westbrook moving forward, realizing that, hey, maybe some issues in Houston last year were not all his fault. Some of it was on Harden as well. I still don't think Russell Westbrook, well, he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't know if he's the kind of guy who can build a championship team around because his offensive game is not primarily focused on three-point shooting. Some of his assists come in times when the shot clock is winding down. He's just throwing out to his guys. Same with Harden. The rebounding is good, obviously. He plays at 100% throughout the entire game. He tries, but he's not a fantastic defender. He's not a good three-point shooter. The mid-range game is So really, you don't have to guard against as much offensively with Russell Westbrook as you do as most guards in the league. Someone like Kyrie Irving, who probably should have been ahead of Russell Westbrook on this list, but I'm not going to go back and change it now because, I already published it in a bunch of places. I don't want to be making changes right now. I'll own my mistake. But I have Russell Westbrook at 17. Probably too high for him. But this is where I keep him in tier 2. And even if I did drop him down, I would still keep him in tier 2 based on what he's been able to do and what I know he can do when he gets hot during the regular season. All right, number 18. This is one of those guys who probably should have been ahead of Russell Westbrook, but going into the year, we really didn't know what we were going to get from him. It's Kyrie Irving. Now, Irving obviously missed plenty of games last year with Brooklyn. We know he's teaming up with KD with the Nets. But the injuries are always a concern. The mentality going into the year was questionable. And it's not just because the narratives the national media are peddling. It's not just that. There are serious things here with his character, with his leadership, with the style and brand of basketball he wants to play. Making comments about we don't need a coach when Steve Nash will clearly be able to help this team out. So, I don't know. I'm not a big Kyrie Irving fan just because of the way he acts publicly. I don't know what he is like privately. So I'm not going to make a full judgment on his character because, like I said, I don't know what he does privately. But at the same time, this is a tremendous basketball player. I mean, the scoring, he set a career high in points per game last year. I mean, granted, that was in a very small sample size, but he was scoring at another clip than what we're used to seeing. And if he can get that going alongside KD, the Brooklyn Nets will be a top 3 seed, if not the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. I still think number 1 is probably reserved for the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm confident saying top 3 for Brooklyn this year. Number 19, this is a guy who got a lot of hate because of the playoffs. It's Paul George, and really, he could be higher than 19. I think this guy could be top 15. We saw what he did in OKC. Not last year, but the year before that. And he was a Defensive Player of the Year and MVP candidate until, of course, there was a shoulder injury that kind of slowed him down in the very end of the season. But prior to that, he was one of the top 10 basketball players in the world. He was tremendous. And he's a great two-way player. He's still a great three-point shooter as well. I think he hit over 40% of his threes last year. So you have a player like that who will shoot out the lights with some of the best point guards like a Lillard or a big man like Cat. He'll shoot like those guys from beyond the three-point arc, a Klay Thompson even, and be a defender who's on par with, if not better than someone like Klay Thompson. And he's got more of a facilitation role. He can do more with off the dribble than Klay Thompson can do. So Paul George, to me, is a top 15 talent. At his peak, he was a top 10 player in OKC. The big issue for him is consistency, and of course, the playoff situation is not going to help him very much. If you're going just based off the regular season, I still think he's a top 20 player very easily, which is why he's number 19 here. And looking back, I might move him ahead of Russell Westbrook and Kyrie Irving and Cat because he does a lot on both sides of the ball. And I can't say that about those 3 other guys. All right, number 20. Remember when I said there was going to be a Klay Thompson clause? This is the Klay Thompson clause. I have him at number 20. I realize he's not going to play this year. I fully acknowledge that. He might not come back and be the same player, even though I think the three-point shooting is something that's going to always be with him. He may not be the same defender when he gets back. He was an all-defensive second-team member before all these injuries came along. So I recognize that he might not be the same guy when he gets back. But I still want to acknowledge everything he's done. He's one of the best three-point shooters of all time. When he's not on the Warriors, they're significantly worse. Even if you got everyone around them healthy, other than Klay Thompson, even if Curry was healthy, Draymond was healthy, and they still had that full roster with Wiggins and Oubre and all those guys, Weissman, I still think there's going to be a significant drop-off without Klay Thompson. Because Klay means that much to that team. He's that good of a two-way player. He's that good of a three-point shooter. Granted, he does not create a lot off the dribble, but this guy's a microwave. And this guy will go off for 20-something points in a quarter and do all of it from beyond the three-point arc. He's that good. I think he's a top 20 player in the world when healthy. Obviously, he is not healthy right now. But I'm hoping he gets back to being close to 90% or 80%, or obviously 100% is what you would want. But if that's not manageable, I would love to see him back at around 90 to 85%, something like that next season, because we need to see Klay Thompson back in action. He's a great player. I think he's going to be a future Hall of Famer, and it's sad that we're going to end up missing 2 seasons worth of his game. Before we get into Tier 3 of the All-Stars, I'd like to remind everyone that I started recording this before the start of the NBA season, so the rankings, of course, have changed because the players getting hurt, because the players playing well or poorly. But I'm very slow, and like I said, this list's been 2 or 3 weeks in the making right now. So I'm sorry if it's coming out a little bit late, and if the rankings are a little screwed up at this point because of the start of the year. But these are what I got, so bear with me. All right, Tier 3 of the All-Stars. Here we have 2 players who I consider developing still, who have been in the league a little while, and I have them directly ahead of 2 more productive players who have put together great careers so far. They have all the numbers in the world that you could ask for, but don't necessarily translate to playing winning basketball. So number 21 is Devin Booker, and we saw what he was doing in the bubble with the Phoenix Suns. That looks like a team that's finally gaining momentum and could put something together this year and actually make the playoffs, especially now they have Chris Paul. I really like Devin Booker. He can score from anywhere on the court. I love the ability that he showed to facilitate a little bit more the past 2 years, where he's building that game up a little bit, even though I don't think he should be the primary playmaker on a team. Leave that to guys like Chris Paul or Ricky Rubio, who they had last year. But Devin Booker's still an amazing scorer, and I think it's about time he's playing his first playoff game. So Devin Booker at 21, Donovan Mitchell at 22. Donovan Mitchell has made it to the playoffs a couple of times now. And this past postseason, unlike in previous years, he did not shy away from the spotlight. Now, unfortunately, his Utah Jazz got eliminated in the first round, but he had a great postseason. And I don't view him as a guy who's going to turn into a James Harden type player. I don't think he'll ever be like that. this is still one of the more solid building blocks in the NBA because he tries defensively. He's not a great defensive player, but he tries. He puts the effort out. And on offense, he's very versatile, extremely athletic. Yeah, it doesn't have necessarily the range of guys like a Devin Booker or even Damian Lillard. But when he is hot, he is so unstoppable. I just think you could build a little bit more around him in Utah. We could draw a little more of his potential during the regular season. Utah could be a top 4 team in the West, but that's not going to happen this year, most likely, considering all the other juggernauts that are in that conference. Here are the 2 players that I think have great numbers, but just have not been able to translate to playing winning basketball. 23 is Trae Young. Phenomenal season last year. That's why he was an all-star starter. His numbers are insane, but the Hawks are terrible. So let's get this straight. If Trae Young was transplanted onto a better basketball team, one competing for a title, let's say Philadelphia. Say for whatever reason Ben Simmons swaps out for Trae Young in that situation. His numbers are going to go down. Because this is a guy right now who's scoring a lot on a very bad team. I think he even struggled last night. Now, of course, we're in the regular season at this point. Last night he had like 7 points or something like that. He's not the phenomenal NBA first teamer that some people think he is. He's not that kind of player, at least not yet. He gives you nothing defensively. I understand he can facilitate. I understand he can score from almost anywhere. There's a lot he needs to develop. And he needs to make sure he can turn this franchise around because if he can't, people are going to start wondering what truly is his ceiling. His value will start dropping regardless of how good his numbers are. And then at 24, we have Bradley Beal, a similar player in the sense that he is dominant offensively. His scoring was through the roof last year. James Harden was pretty much the only one scoring better than him. The issue with Bradley Beal is that since John Wall got injured, and now obviously he's no longer with the team, the Washington Wizards have not been a winning organization. They've not been a good franchise. They haven't even come close. And last night, they played against the Philadelphia 76ers. So whenever this video comes out, it's the day after Bradley Beal scored 60 points on the Philadelphia 76ers and still lost the game. And it's not all on Bradley Beal, granted. He doesn't have the best cast around him. But his production has not translated to winning. And even other games where he scored a lot of points, they weren't always winning. So to me, there's some question marks here with Bradley Beal and Trae Young. Yes, great statistically. They look good on the court. Some of them are fun to watch. But there are question marks here whether or not they can do that on a winning team. At 25 and 26, we have 2 centers. 25 is Rudy Gobert. Great defensively. I mean, his ability to alter shots at the rim, I always underrated Rudy Gobert. I always thought he was never going to crack the top 30. But we had to face reality. He is a tremendous force defensively. And he has just enough athleticism that he can go out to the mid-range, sometimes beyond the three-point arc, and recover if someone gets behind him. So he's a very good defensive player. Offensively, I'm not giving him the ball to post that much offensively, if I'm being honest. I wouldn't do that because he slows down the offense. And it's not nearly as efficient dumping the ball into him as it would be to move the ball around a little more and create shots for someone else. Someone who's more mobile on the offensive end. So to me, he's more of a one-dimensional player. He's total defense. He can score offensively, but you don't really want him to be the focal point of that end of the ball. Still, just for his defensive ability, he's earned this spot. Number 26, it's another great defensive player. It's Bam Adebayo, who was all-defensive second-teamer last year. The difference between him and Gobert is, yes, he doesn't shoot the 3 ball. He doesn't really have much of a mid-range shot yet. Those are still developing. So him and Gobert are similar in that aspect that they can't provide outside shooting. But Bam can put the ball on the court. He can dribble really well. He can facilitate really well. He's agile enough that he can go out and defend pick and rolls masterfully. That's one of the reasons why he's one of the best defensive centers in the league is that you can put him out there by a three-point arc and not have to worry about him. So Bam is up here because of that, but also offensively offers more than Rudy Gobert because he can facilitate and he can create shots for his teammates. That's something Rudy Gobert can't really do from his spot in post. Number 27 is Chris Middleton. I kind of wanted to put Middleton higher, but I just couldn't find the spot to plug him in. Maybe you can make the argument he goes above Gobert and Bam Adebayo. I would understand that. The reason why he's up as high is because of his shot creation. He can create shots. He can carry the Bucks when Giannis is out. We've seen him do it in the past. Obviously, now Drew Holiday's there as well. It becomes a lot easier that if Giannis is to miss time, Chris Middleton can help him out quite a bit. I view him as a very good player. I don't think he is a legit number 1 option. I do think he's a legit number 2 option, though. And he could, hypothetically, go to a team, be the top option, and get them to a fringe playoff situation. I don't think he's going to do what Russell Westbrook did with the Oklahoma City Thunder back when after Kevin Durant left and after James Harden was gone, where he got that team to the playoffs. I don't think he can do that per se, but he would be good enough to get a bad team into a fringe playoff situation. I think he would actually perform better on a bad team than someone like a Bradley Beal or someone like a Trae Young. Number 28, Kyle Lowry. This is not based solely on his basketball skills, if you get what I'm saying. This guy is a leader for Toronto Raptors. When he's not on the court, when he's not healthy, they don't stand a chance. He does so much for them, from taking charges, putting out the effort on both ends of the court, facilitating. There are so many small things that Kyle Lowry does. And I understand people get annoyed every year when he's an all-star because your favorite player didn't make it or something like that. But Kyle Lowry deserves it. Because the more I've watched Kyle Lowry, including in the bubble in this past playoffs, he's a legitimate player. He's a legitimate star in the league. And he does so much for the Raptors that they would not be a relevant team. Even this year they're struggling, but they would not be a relevant team without Kyle Lowry, who is the true leader of that organization. Number 29 is Jrue Holiday. I love what Jrue Holiday brings to the table because he does a little bit of everything. This is a guy who is a former all-defensive player. He's a former all-star. He will go out and get you 7 or 8 assists a night if you need him to. He will get you 4 to 5 rebounds. He will get you 20 to 25 points, 18 to 25 points, something in that range. So that's why Jrue Holiday is a perfect fit for those Milwaukee Bucks teams. They need that third cog that was going to be a key player on both ends of the court alongside Giannis and Chris Middleton. Jrue Holiday is that guy. In fact, they did a lot of stuff, obviously, for the developing New Orleans Pelicans last year. And now he's moving to a different situation where he will play a little bit of a less central role in the offense. So his numbers may go down, but I don't think his importance will decrease. This is a guy who has been around the block. He can do it on both ends of the court. It's rare to find a guy with the two-way capabilities that he has to not only be a scorer, but also facilitate, play on-ball defense, just be one of the smartest players on the court in terms of basketball IQ. And he's a great teammate. He's a great locker room presence. So Jrue Holiday to me is the total package that you want in a player. Number 30 is the reigning most improved player of the year. It's Brandon Ingram. Brandon Ingram is playing a more significant role on the New Orleans Pelicans than he has in previous seasons because Jrue Holiday is not there. Even though Zion has emerged as a legitimate scorer, Brandon Ingram, I think you could argue, is still the most versatile player on that team, considering the jump he's made in three-point percentage, jump he's made in free throws. He's really developed an offensive game that he didn't have in Los Angeles. I mean, he was not the most versatile scorer on this team in previous seasons. He is this year because he can do so much for them. Defensively, we never really saw him get to use his length to develop into a good defensive player. I don't think that will ever happen at this point. But even without a good defensive center on the other side or a good defensive presence from Brandon Ingram, I still think he does enough offensively with his ability to shoot the three ball at this point and create shots that he belongs in the conversation among the perennial all-stars in this league. Number 31. Again, I would go back and change this if I felt like I could, but the article has been out there for a while now. Again, I posted this article on thegruelingtruth.com before the season started. Number 31 is Blake Griffin. And I understand that after watching him and what the Detroit Pistons have done a little bit earlier on in the year, I can understand when people will scratch their heads at that and say, why the heck is he 31? We need to remember what they did 2 years ago. Blake Griffin was an all-NBA caliber player 2 years ago because his three-point shooting was way up. He was doing a great job with three-point shooting. So he extended his range. He was handling the ball well. He was dribbling well. He was facilitating. He lost some of that explosiveness, but he made up for it by finding his handles and finding an outside shot. It was one of the better player evolutions we had seen at the time, and that's helped him develop into an all-NBA player who was not known just for his dunking. So I think we have to take that into account. And that's part of the reason why he's 31, is I was looking at that and saying if Blake Griffin can even be 80% of what he was that year, he could still be a top 35 player in the league. And it certainly seems like he's lost even more of that early on this season, which is unfortunately very regrettable. Number 32 is Kemba Walker. Now, Kemba, when he gets back and when he starts playing for Boston again, will play a crucial role in that offense. But I think we've seen from Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, that even without Kemba Walker, they are perfectly fine offensively. And Kemba's not bringing much on the defensive side of the ball. So I think his role in Boston has been highly diminished, but I don't think we should overlook what he did with the Hornets before that when he was an all-NBA point guard on a very bad team, leading them to wins, getting them to the playoffs some years. We have to remember that Kemba Walker, right now, when he gets back, he'll probably be outshined by the two younger players around him. But Kemba Walker is still a top 35 player in the league. He is a very good point guard offensively, just the ability to facilitate, be a clutch shooter towards the end of the game. He's always going to be able to score. Of course, the big issue for him is the lack of defense and now maybe being overshadowed by some of his teammates. Number 33 is Pascal Siakam. This is a guy who struggled in the playoffs, in the bubble, and hasn't really gotten back to his usual self at the start of this season. So he's kind of sleepwalking through the very start of this year. He's struggling, and so are the Raptors to some degree. I think he'll get it back. Siakam is a very good player. I just don't know if he's going to be a perennial all-star. I don't view him as the type of guy, unless he improves and gets back into his rhythm, who's going to be an all-star every single year. But at the high end, when he is playing well and when his mind's right, this guy will get you close to 30 points per game. He will do things on the defensive end of the ball that will help you out, and he rebounds well enough to help you on that part as well. So, to me, Siakam, normal Siakam we're used to seeing, the guy we saw before the playoff issues last year, that Pascal Siakam is a top 40, top 35 player in the league right now. The way he's playing currently, that's not the case, but maybe he'll turn things around, finish this year strong. We're only a couple of games in. Let's not kill him right now. He's only a couple of games into the season. There's still a lot of room for improvement in his game. And knowing how good of a coach Nick Nurse is, and he has Kyle Lowry there to help him out as well, hopefully he will get things back on track. Number 34 is Jaylen Brown. If we're going just based on the start of the season, he'd be much higher up in this list. He'd be in the top 30 if I could redo the list, which I said I'm not going to do just because I already posted it, and I want to be able to use that for a video. So this video is coming out maybe more than a month after I posted that article, which is why Brown's down this low on the list. But he's a great two-way player. We've seen what he's been able to do alongside Jayson Tatum in Boston, even with Kemba Walker sidelined right now. He's scoring at a much higher clip than we're used to. But people will say, if you're a Jaylen Brown fan, they'll tell you they've seen this all along. They've known he's capable of doing this, and he's had performances like this in the past that just haven't caught everyone's eye. If he can up his game to the point where he's scoring 23 points per night and still playing his role defensively, and this guy will be a top 25 player in the league potentially because of what he can do on the defensive end, but also offensively. And that second fiddle role to Jayson Tatum, it suits him perfectly. It's a great duo right now, and one of the hottest duos in the NBA. Keep in mind that I am recording this part of the video on January 7th, so maybe that'll change in the coming weeks, but for right now, Jaylen Brown has the hot hand. Number 35 and number 36 are two big ones. 35 is Kristaps Porzingis. 36 is Domantas Sabonis. Very different styles of play here. Porzingis is a 3-and-D guy in terms of that he's a great three-point shooter, a high-volume three-point shooter, by the way. One of the best stretch fours you could find in the NBA, or stretch five, depending if they're playing on the center on a given night. But he's also a tremendous rim protector. Sabonis plays very differently. I know he's shooting more threes this year than normal, but he's not a great three-point shooter generally. And he's not going to be a lockdown defender. That's Miles Turner's role on the Indiana Pacers. However, Sabonis is able to dribble around the court. He's got the versatility to facilitate offensively and create more shots for his teammates, which is why he was an all-star last year. Porzingis, on the other hand, he's developing handles. We really haven't gotten to see him use them to the full extent of his capabilities so far. So that's something he's still trying to add to his arsenal, while Sabonis already has that. Of course, Porzingis is a much better three-point shooter than what Sabonis will probably ever be, and also a much better rim protector. Granted, the natural size comes in handy there, but the long arms and athleticism also play a role in Porzingis protecting the rim. Sabonis, not to say that he's an absolute black hole on defense, but he's nowhere near what Porzingis is in terms of protecting the rim. And in Tier 4, the final tier of this video, we will discuss the borderline All-Stars. And I'm going to pick up the pace here a little bit because I just realized that my subscription to Adobe Premiere has expired since I'm no longer a college student, no longer on the college plan. So next time I Command Q Adobe Premiere, I'm never going to be able to reopen unless I buy a subscription again, which I'm not going to do. So I need to hurry this up a little bit. CJ McCollum opens up Tier 4. Obviously, great shooter. Brings a little more defensively than some of the guys who have absolutely no defensive prowess whatsoever. So it gives you a little something there in the length. But primarily what you're getting in for is the shooting. And he pairs extremely well with Damian Lillard. They put together a winning team in the past. Never got into that championship. I still think you could look at McCollum and say he's a legitimate number 2, even if he's never made an All-Star game. Number 38 is Nikola Vucevic from the Orlando Magic. He's a more dominant player than McCollum is. McCollum doesn't necessarily take over the games the same way that Vuce does, and partially because he's the mainstay in Orlando. At center, we saw him mess around with the Milwaukee Bucks in the postseason, this past postseason, and put great numbers. And he's really capable of performing at an all-star level. He's been an all-star in the past. A lot of it just depends on the pieces around him. Because Orlando is obviously a very up-and-down team. They can get streaky at times. They're always around that 7th or 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. But when Vucevic is on his game, he's definitely an all-star caliber player. But I think a low-tier all-star not someone who's going to make it every single year. Number 39 is Jamal Murray, and this can be said just based on what he did in this past postseason. He was dominant. He was fantastic. And in fact, if we were ranking him based on this past postseason, I would probably have him more towards the top 40. But he's here for now because we don't know if he's going to be able to do what he did in the bubble over the expanse of an entire season. That's still up in the air. From what I've seen so far this season, I remain hopeful that he will continue to develop and potentially reach an all-star level either this year or in a few coming seasons. Number 40 is De'Aaron Fox. And speaking of a point guard with all-star potential, I really love watching De'Aaron Fox play. I think the biggest issue for him, well, besides playing on the Kings, which obviously doesn't help out that much, but the biggest issue for him personally is the three-point shooting. He has improved over every season that he's been in the NBA, but he's not a great three-point shooter. And right now, there's no way of telling he'll ever develop into a quality three-point shooter. And I think he's averaging right around 30% from three this season so far, which is viable, but it's not electric. It's not an all-star caliber percentage. So you're going to have to see how that develops. But to me, that's probably the biggest part of this game that needs development right now. Other than that, I love his speed. I love his ability to steal the ball. I love his passing facilitation. It's just that three-point shot needs work. Number 41, another point guard, it's Ja Morant. Obviously, he's very explosive. This guy who came out and had a really good rookie season. Not on the same level of a guy like Luka when Luka was a rookie, or Trae Young maybe, but still a very good season where you have a player who looks like he could be a borderline all-star in the future. He could be an all-star as soon as next season. I don't think it will happen this year. There's still a lot more for him to develop. He still has to work his way into the NBA a little bit more. I don't think he's on the same level as a guy like Trae Young or Luka, where they were all-stars by their second seasons. I don't think Ja Morant is that kind of player yet, which is why he's this far down the list. Number 42, speaking of a guy who needs to work his way into the NBA a little bit more, it's Zion Williamson. Now, Zion already this season is performing well. He's putting up numbers. He's scoring proficiently. The thing with him, again, it's three-point shooting. He needs to develop a three-point shot. I would like to see him develop better handles. I'd like to see him pass the ball a little bit more and serve as more of a facilitator than just a low-post scorer. So his game has to expand outward, quite frankly, before he reaches the levels of an all-NBA caliber player. He'll have the numbers. He'll always have the scoring, the physical dominance, but there's so much more for him to develop right now before reaching a top 30 or top 20 level. Number 43 is D'Angelo Russell. Obviously, he was ranked much higher on this list after making the playoffs with the Brooklyn Nets, but, things have gone downhill since then. Going to Golden State, now to Minnesota. There's a lot of questions that remain unanswered with him. Not going to play defense. He's not a defensive player. But will his offensive game ever reach a point where it's so dominant that it can overcome his defensive shortcomings? He's a very good player, don't get me wrong. This guy will be an all-star again at some point in his career, but he doesn't separate much from all the other great point guards, especially in the Western Conference. Number 44 is Zach LaVine. I know there are a lot of people out there who really don't like Zach LaVine because, again, lots of points, lots of scoring, lots of shooting, not a lot of facilitation or defense on a very bad team. I've said that about a bunch of players on this list, so I'm not going to hold Zach LaVine out for the same thing that I kept a lot of guys from being top 20 players. I can put him in the 40s and feel very comfortable with it because I have guys who are all scoring, very little passing, no defense in the top 30. So if I have guys like that up there, I feel comfortable with LaVine here, especially because he's a clutch shooter. He's had a couple of very big games for Chicago in the past year and a half. I trust Zach LaVine at the end of games. I just don't know if I trust him to be the superstar and the central pillar of my franchise. Number 45 is LaMarcus Aldridge. He's closing in on 20,000 career points. This guy's probably going to be a Hall of Fame player, which some people will say is crazy, but he's been an All-NBA player in the past. He's got 7 All-Star appearances, which is more than enough to qualify him for a Hall of Fame bid. So Aldridge, future Hall of Fame player, most likely. The issue with him has been injuries and also just the way the Spurs are run right now. I mean, Aldridge is getting up there in age. He's developing more of a three-point shot so he can remain a viable offensive player into his mid and late 30s. But the way things are going right now in San Antonio, it really doesn't matter. They're not going to be competitive the next couple of years, and they're probably not going to be competitive during the time that Aldridge is there. Still a very good offensive player that gives you a little bit of rim protection on the defensive side of the ball. Number 46 is our San Antonio Spurs. I know all the analytics are pointing against DeMar DeRozan at this point. I know that a lot of people are leaving it off the top 50 list. I still believe there's something to DeMar DeRozan's game, especially his mastery of the mid-range. I think that the facilitation isn't necessarily there in the sense that it is for some other players on this list, some more point guard-oriented players. whereas DeMar, a shooting guard, does not have a three-point shot. He's a great two-point shooter, but that's very inefficient in the modern style. And so DeMar DeRozan is seeing his value decline quickly, especially after leaving Toronto where he was winning and they were the 1 seed 1 year. Now he's in San Antonio when they can't even make the playoffs. 47 is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I have high hopes for SGA, but I'm not entirely sold on him yet. We're going to see how it does this season when Chris Paul is no longer on the Thunder. No more Dennis Schroeder either. We'll see how it turns out for SGA. This is his first chance to really be the leader and be the man on a team and see where he can take them. And we saw what Chris Paul did for them last year. We saw what Schroeder did coming off the bench. Now it's time for SGA to take the reins and captain a bad team. And it is a bad team. It's a rebuilding team. We're just going to focus on SGA being the main pillar moving forward, the main guy on that team. We'll see who's capable of playing that role and whether or not that works out in the future, whether he takes a step forward, whether he stays where he is. It'll be very interesting to see how it plays out. Number 48 is Victor Oladipo. There was a time where I believe I had him in the top 20, maybe 2 years ago. That's because he was an all-NBAer, he was an all-defensive caliber player, and we're at a point where the injuries have just taken so much from him. I'll be interested to see if he gets that defensive capability back, because if he's a good defender again, he can very easily move up this list. But we got a glimpse of him maybe come back a little too quickly in the playoffs, in the bubble, in Orlando, and he did not look good. I think he did more damage than good for the Indiana Pacers at that time. There were rumors about him wanting to be traded all offseason long. Who knows how long he can stay in Indiana. But right now, Victor Oladipo is still – I'm still giving him the benefit of the doubt, or a benefit of the doubt, sort of like I did with Blake Griffin, where I've seen this guy perform at an all-NBA caliber level before, and he's not too far removed from it. So I believe that there's something still there for Victor Oladipo, which is why he remains in the top 50. Number 49, Danilo Gallinari. What he specializes in, of course, is three-point shooting. He's one of the best stretch fours in the NBA right now. And when he's on the court, the offensive rating of teams just shoots through the roof. I mean, the impact he has, his ability to shoot, is incredible. And granted, he's not going to offer you much defensively. He's not going to get down the post and do much for you in that area. But the ability to have a stretch four of his caliber on the floor makes any team better. And speaking of a stretch four, number 50 is Kevin Love. I'm not going to give up on Kevin Love. I'm going to keep hoping that he will recover and get back to his all-star form, or at least get close to it. Maybe get out of Cleveland, go to a better team that could actually use him, potentially win a championship. I still believe in Kevin Love. I still think Kevin Love is a good player, still a productive player, can get you the rebounds you need. Not going to give you much defensively, but still a great stretch 4, stretch 5, depending on what you're looking for. And I think he could play a role on a championship team or a team that just needs shooting. And frankly, I'm looking at Golden State right now. Financially, it probably won't work out. But a team like Golden State, which will be a low-level playoff team probably at this point, considering all the injuries they've dealt with, they need three-point shooting. They need players who can shoot. Kevin Love can shoot. There are a lot of teams out there that will need a guy like Kevin Love. But Kevin Love would improve a lot of really good teams or a lot of competitors. So I leave him at number 50 on this list. All right, 2 for the road. These are 2 players to look forward to in the future who could crack the top 50 and could be top 50 players by the end of this year. Number 51, DeAndre Ayton. Number 52, Fred VanVleet. So VanVleet stepping up his role with Toronto right now because of, well, they're losing players. They've lost a couple guys over the years at this point. They've lost some scoring, some depth. Guys like Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol, Kawhi wasn't there last year, but he obviously losing him 2 years ago was a big deal. Meanwhile, you have DeAndre Ayton, who's one of the core members of the Phoenix Suns, along with Chris Paul and Devin Booker. He's doing big man, obviously, of that core. Very young. He's working on developing his offensive game. He's already pretty good at rim protection. You get that on the defensive side of the ball. He's very strong, very physical. He must diversify his offensive game if he ever wants to fully maximize his potential. DeAndre Ayton's already helping the Phoenix Suns win more games than they were in the past. And he's developing very quickly. But his offensive game needs to diversify a lot more before he reaches the point where he's fully maximizing and taking full control of his potential. And once he reaches that point, the Phoenix Suns will be in probably the top half of the Western Conference. They might already be there. Who knows? But there's a lot of hope there for DeAndre Ayton developing to a top 30 player in the NBA.